People always say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what they don't tell you is that the best revenge isn't about anger at all. It's about patience. It's about building something so quietly, so meticulously, that the person who wronged you doesn't even know they're standing in the shadow of what you've created. 3 years ago, I sat at a dinner table with my son. He was sitting right across from me, bragging about his new promotion. His hand was on the table. There was a wedding ring on his finger, my daughter's ring, and in my jacket pocket, I was holding something he had no idea existed, an envelope. And inside that envelope was proof that he'd been lying to his family for over a decade. But here's the thing. I didn't get angry that night. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene, because I had already won. I just didn't know it yet. And today, I'm telling you exactly what I did and why it worked. My name is David. But before I get into the story, I need you to understand who I was, because that context matters. I grew up poor, not tragic, not heartbreaking, just poor. My parents worked in factories. Long hours, minimum wage, the kind of people that nobody really notices. I remember my father's hands. They were always red, always cracked from the chemicals. My mother would wrap them in lotion at night, and I'd watch her do it while we watched the news on a TV that got 3 channels if you angled the antenna right. When I was 23, I had an idea. Nothing revolutionary. I wasn't trying to change the world. I just saw a problem and thought maybe I can solve this better than the way it's being done now. I borrowed $5,000 from a credit union, took out a loan against the promise that I had 0 collateral except my own word. The loan officer's name was Margaret. She believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. I still remember her handwriting on the loan paperwork. It was careful, deliberate, like she was signing something she knew mattered. That $5,000 became my first business. It was logistics. Boring, right? But see, most people don't understand logistics. They don't understand supply chains. They see the finished product in a store, and they think it just appears. They don't understand all the invisible work, the timing, the coordination, the people who move things from one place to another without ever being seen. I was one of those invisible people, and I got very good at it. Now, fast forward to today. That $5,000 startup became something bigger. Much bigger. By the time my daughter got married, I had built a company with over 800 employees, annual revenue in the tens of millions, offices in 6 cities. I owned the company outright, every single share. Asterisk. But here's the thing, and this is important. Nobody knew. Well, not nobody. My wife knew. My accountant knew. But socially, publicly, I was just a quiet guy in his 50s with a comfortable life. I drove a Toyota Camry, silver, 2015, still running perfectly. I wore the same brands of clothing I'd worn for 10 years, polo shirts, khakis. I went to the same coffee shop every morning and ordered the same thing. Black coffee, no sugar. People underestimate quiet people. That's a fact. There's something about someone who doesn't need to announce themselves. It makes other people nervous, I think. Like they're waiting for the reveal. Like they know there's more to the story, but they can't quite figure it out. I never corrected anyone's assumptions. If someone thought I was middle management at some nondescript firm, I let them think that. If they thought my wife and I were moderately successful, I smiled and nodded. I wasn't being dishonest. I was just selective about what I shared. And that's when my daughter, Sarah, got married. I need to tell you about Marcus, because Marcus is the kind of person that, on the surface, seems perfect. Genuinely, he's tall, well-dressed, not in an ostentatious way, in that careful way where you can tell he thinks about what he wears. The kind of person who wears watches that cost 3 months' salary and makes sure people notice, not by pointing them out, but by the way he positions his wrist when he shakes hands or gestures when talking. When I first met him, I was impressed. I'm not going to lie. This was a man with ambition. You could see it in the way he spoke. He had this habit of making eye contact for just a fraction too long. Not creepy, just like he was making sure you understood the value of whatever he was saying. He worked in tech, software development, senior developer position at a growing company. He told people he was essentially running the technical infrastructure, which was accurate, but also the kind of thing a person says when they want you to imagine they're more important than they actually are. My wife, Helen, loved him immediately. She's the kind of person who sees people at face value. She doesn't have suspicion in her DNA. She just accepts people and loves them and believes in them. I used to think it was a weakness. Now I think it might be a superpower. Either way, meant Marcus had an instant ally. Sarah seemed happy, and that's what mattered to me. My daughter was smiling. She was in love. She was planning a future with this man. And even though something in my gut, something quiet and old and observant, told me to pay attention to Marcus, I pushed it down. I didn't want to be the father who ruined his daughter's happiness with suspicion. The first year of their marriage was normal, really normal. They'd come over for dinners. Marcus would ask me about my work, and I'd give him the vague version, which is what I gave everyone. He'd talk about his job with this mix of excitement and desperation, like he needed you to understand how important he was. Every story he told ended with him being the smartest person in the room. But he was charming about it. That was the thing. He wasn't arrogant in a way that made you angry. He was arrogant in a way that made you want to believe in him. Like maybe he really was that smart, and you just hadn't realized it yet. Then, about 14 months into their marriage, something shifted. Sarah called me. Early morning. I remember the time because I was in my home office and the sun was coming through the window at that angle that only happens in early September. Around 7:45 a.m., she was crying. Not hysterically, just quietly. The way someone cries when they're trying not to cry, but they can't quite hold it together. She said, "Dad, something's wrong." When your daughter says something's wrong, there's a frequency in her voice, a particular quality. It's not the same as when she had boy problems in high school or when she was stressed about work. This was deeper. This was my marriage might be breaking, crying. She came over that afternoon. Helen was at a book club. It was just Sarah and me in the kitchen. She sat at the table, the same table we'd eaten at for 20 years, and she just started. "He's been lying," she said, "about everything." And that's when I learned the truth about Marcus. The first lie, his job title. He wasn't running the technical infrastructure. He was on a team of 12 developers, doing the same work everyone else was doing. He'd exaggerated his role so many times that Sarah had believed him. They both had. The second lie, his education. He told people he went to Stanford. Sarah checked his diploma once. After 14 months of marriage, she decided to look through some boxes. He went to San Jose State, a perfectly good school, but it wasn't Stanford. And the way he talked about it, the way he name-dropped the school in conversation, was designed to make people think he was in an elite category he wasn't actually in. The third lie, his savings. He'd told Sarah before they got married that he had a significant amount of money saved, 6 figures. She found bank statements. He had about $12,000. He was living paycheck to paycheck and performing wealth like a luxury brand. But here's the thing, that's not what broke her. People lie about status all the time. It's pathetic, and it says something about who they are, but it's not a deal breaker for everyone. The fourth lie is what shattered her. Asterisk, he had a wife, not legally, but he had a woman, Alina, who he'd been with for 4 years before Sarah. They lived together. He'd told Sarah he'd never been in a serious relationship before, that Sarah was his first real love, that she was different, Alina found out. Marcus had gotten married because she saw the wedding announcement on Facebook from a mutual friend. That's how she found out her 4-year partner had married someone else. Sarah showed me the emails. Alina had contacted her directly. The emails were long, detailed. She included screenshots, photos, documentation of their relationship. She wasn't angry in the emails. That would have been easier. She was heartbroken. She kept saying things like, "I just needed you to know the truth, and I can't believe he did this to you, too." My daughter sat in my kitchen and cried, and I sat across from her and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt rage, real, pure, almost blinding rage. Now, I want you to understand something about me. I've been successful because I'm patient, because I think through consequences, because I don't act on impulse. But that day, sitting with my daughter, every instinct I had was telling me to find Marcus and show him what physical consequences felt like. I didn't, obviously. What I did instead was listen. Sarah talked for 2 hours. She described her entire relationship with Marcus in a new light. All the little things that suddenly made sense. The way he'd deflect when she asked about his past. The way he'd get defensive if she questioned anything he said. The way he'd make her feel stupid if she caught an inconsistency. Like she was being paranoid and suspicious. By the time she left my house that day, I had made a decision. Not an angry decision. A strategic one. I was going to help my daughter, but I wasn't going to do it the way she expected. Here's what I did. And I need you to understand that I'm telling you this as context, not as justification. I had the resources and the connections to do something that most people don't. I hired an investigator, not because I didn't believe Sarah. I believed her completely. But I needed documentation. Real, bulletproof documentation. Evidence that Marcus couldn't manipulate or reframe or gaslight away. Over the next 6 months, while Sarah and Marcus were still married, while they were still living in the same house, while he was still going to work every day with no idea that his father-in-law was quietly, systematically documenting his life, the investigator uncovered things: financial fraud. Small scale, but fraud nonetheless. He'd taken money from a joint account, money that Sarah had contributed, and used it to pay off debts from his previous relationship. Debts he'd never told her he had. An affair, not emotional, physical, with a woman from his office. The kind of stupid affair where he used his work email to communicate with her, sent her money through a PayPal account he thought Sarah didn't know about. and had literally arranged to meet her at a hotel 17 minutes from his office at 1 p.m. on Tuesday afternoons. And then there was something else. Marcus had a pattern, a real pattern. The investigator found documentation of 3 women before Alina, 3 serious relationships, and in each one he'd done the same thing. Exaggerated his background, lied about his finances, created a fantasy version of himself. And in 2 of those relationships, he'd cheated. This wasn't a man making a mistake. This was a man with a pathological pattern. This was someone who built relationships on deception and then destroyed them when reality threatened to collide with the fiction he'd constructed. Now, during this time, Marcus had no idea any of this was happening. He was going to work. He was coming home. He was probably making promises to Sarah about their future, about kids, about buying a house, about all the things couples plan when they're supposed to be building something together. And I was watching, waiting, building a case. You might be wondering why I didn't just give Sarah all this information immediately, why I let her live with him while I was gathering evidence. The answer is complicated, but it comes down to this. Sarah needed to make her own decision. She needed to see her husband clearly. And I knew that once I gave her the evidence, once it became real in her hands, her marriage was over. I wanted to make sure she was ready for that. I also wanted to make sure that if they divorced, if it came to that, she had everything she needed to protect herself. I wanted him to have no legal argument, no way to claim victim status, no way to rewrite the narrative. But mostly, I was waiting for the right moment, because I had something else planned. I had something bigger in mind. Let me tell you about where Marcus worked. Tech Venture Solutions. Probably you've never heard of it. It's not a household name, but it's a solid, growing tech company. Founded in 2003, steady growth, good employees. The kind of company that doesn't make headlines, but makes money. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody at Tech Venture Solutions knew, was that I'd been quietly acquiring shares in that company for 3 years. Let me explain how this happened. About 4 years ago, one of the original founders of Tech Venture, a man named Robert Chen, reached out to me. We knew each other from the business community. Not close, but we'd served on a couple of non-profit boards together. He reached out because his company was facing a problem. They'd experienced significant growth, but the growth had outpaced their infrastructure. They needed capital. They needed it fast. And they needed someone who understood operations and logistics. Robert came to me and asked if I'd be interested in becoming an investor. A significant investor, the kind of investor who gets a seat on the board. I said no, not because I didn't believe in the company, but because investing is just putting money in. I told Robert I had a different offer. What if I became not just an investor, but an operator? What if I came into the company, restructured the operations, fixed the infrastructure problems, and in exchange, I earned a majority stake? It took 2 years of negotiation. But eventually, Robert agreed. I came in. I learned the business. I fixed the problems. I grew the company. And through a series of strategic stock purchases and operational restructuring, I became the principal owner of Tech Venture Solutions. My name was on the papers, but my name was not public. My title at the company was Operations Director. I worked out of a quiet office. I rarely attended all-hands meetings. I was the infrastructure. I was invisible. And Marcus Marcus worked for me every single day. He had no idea. When Sarah told me about Marcus's lies, about his infidelity, about his financial fraud, something shifted in my mind. I realized I had access to something most fathers-in-law don't have. I had access to power. The question was, what was I going to do with it? I didn't move fast. That's not how I operate. I waited another month. Sarah was in the process of separating from Marcus. It was messy, as these things are, but she was doing it, and I was supporting her in every way I could, financially, emotionally, logistically. I hired a divorce attorney who was like a shark, and I gave Sarah all the evidence we'd collected. The divorce papers were filed. Marcus, to his credit, didn't fight it. Maybe he knew he was guilty and didn't want a prolonged legal battle. Maybe he was already planning his next victim. Either way, he was cooperative, almost suspiciously cooperative. Then, about 3 months after the separation, Marcus called me. Out of the blue, he asked if we could have dinner, just the two of us. He said he wanted to talk about everything, and he said he wanted to make things right with Sarah's family. I said yes immediately, because I realized this was the moment. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. We arranged to meet at a restaurant, upscale, but not ostentatious. Good lighting, quiet booths, professional service, the kind of place where you can have a serious conversation without being overheard. The day of the dinner, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wore a different watch, not expensive, just a different one. A business watch. A watch that said something. I wore a suit, a custom suit that I'd had for 5 years, but rarely wore because I didn't believe in performing status. And I brought an envelope. Helen noticed. "What are you doing?" she asked. I told her I'm going to have a conversation with Marcus, and I want him to understand, from the moment he sees me, that this conversation is not equal. "Are you going to hurt him?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I'm going to change how he understands his own life." Marcus was already at the table when I arrived. He stood up to shake my hand. His grip was firm, too firm, the kind of handshake that's trying to communicate dominance. "David," he said, "thanks for coming. I know, given everything, this probably feels weird." "It does," I said. I didn't smile. I didn't soften it with a joke or social courtesy. I sat down. I looked at him. I let the silence exist for a moment. Marcus immediately started talking. That's what guilty people do. They fill silence. They can't stand the vacuum, so they rush in to explain, to justify, to perform normalcy. Asterisk, "I wanted to apologize," he said, "to you, to Helen, to Sarah. I made mistakes. I lied. And I know there's probably no way to fix it. But I wanted you to know that I recognize what I did was wrong." It was a decent apology, structured well. It hit the right notes, and I would have believed it if I didn't know exactly who Marcus was. "I appreciate that," I said. "I really do. But I want to talk to you about something else." I pulled the envelope out of my jacket. I didn't open it. I just placed it on the table between us. Asterisk. Marcus looked at it. His face changed just slightly, but it changed. His jaw tightened. "What is that?" he asked. "Before we eat," I said, "I want to tell you a story, because I think context matters here, and I think you should understand where I'm coming from." I told him about Margaret, the loan officer who believed in me when I had nothing. I told him about those early days, starting a business on $5,000 and a promise. I told him about the years of work, the people I hired, the infrastructure I built. I told him about a business that grew from nothing into something real and substantial. I watched his face while I was talking. He was confused. He didn't understand why I was telling him this. He was waiting for the threat, the reveal, the moment where this became about him and his failures. My point, I said, is that I understand ambition. I understand wanting to build something, wanting people to see you a certain way, wanting to matter. Thank you, Marcus said carefully. I'm not done, I said, and I wasn't unkind about it. I was just firm. There's a difference. I told him about my values, about how I'd built my business on honesty, on transparency with my employees, on creating a company where people were valued for who they actually were, not who they pretended to be. That matters to me, I said. And it mattered to me that my daughter married someone who shared those values. Or at least, I thought it did. That's when I opened the envelope. I didn't take everything out, just the top document, a photograph. It was Marcus and Alina. They were at an airport. His arm was around her. They both looked happy. The photo was dated 3 months after he'd gotten married to Sarah. I slid it across the table. I watched him look at it. I watched the color drain from his face. I said nothing. Sometimes silence is more powerful than words. Sometimes the absence of sound is the loudest thing in the room. Marcus tried to explain. He said, "That photo is..." But I put my hand up. "Here's what I'm going to tell you," I said. "And I want you to listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once." I reached into the envelope, and I pulled out a business card. Not my personal card, my company card, the one I rarely used, the one that said, Tech Venture Solutions. I watched his face. And I want to be clear, this wasn't about cruelty. I wasn't trying to humiliate him, though humiliation was the inevitable result. I was trying to show him something. I was trying to make him understand that every single day he'd walked into that office, every day he'd gone to his cubicle, every day he'd attended a meeting or sent an email or logged into a system, he'd been in my building. Under my watch, part of my world. I've owned Tech Venture Solutions for almost 4 years, I said. You've worked there for 3 of them. Every day, I could see exactly what you were doing. I could see your emails. I could see your financial transactions. I could see the patterns of your behavior. And what I saw, I continued, was a man who told himself a story about who he was. A story that didn't match reality. A man who built relationships on fiction and destroyed them when the fiction couldn't hold. Marcus was pale now, completely pale. He was shaking slightly. He said, "David, I didn't know that's exactly the point," I said. "You didn't know. And that's the position I wanted you to be in. I wanted you to understand what it feels like to be evaluated by someone you don't see coming. I wanted you to know what it's like to be in a power dynamic that you don't even know exists until it's too late to change it." I told him that he'd cheated on my daughter, that he'd defrauded her financially, that he'd manipulated her emotionally, and that every single day I'd had access to him, to his systems, to his data, and I'd chosen not to use it to hurt him. Not because he deserved mercy, but because my daughter deserved a clean divorce, and the best way to get that was to let him think he was getting away with something. Asterisk, you played a game with my daughter, I said, and you lost. But you don't even know the full scope of what you've lost yet because you're only understanding it right now. And that's going to stay with you. Not because I'm going to punish you, but because you're going to spend the rest of your life knowing that you were in a game you didn't know was being played, and you lost to someone you completely underestimated. I stood up. I took the envelope, and I said one last thing. In the next 3 days, you're going to be terminated from Tech Venture Solutions. Not because of your behavior toward Sarah, though that's reason enough, but because a man who builds his entire life on deception cannot be trusted in a position of responsibility. You'll receive your final paycheck and a severance package. It will be enough to cover your expenses for 2 months if you're careful. After that, you're on your own. You can tell people you left to pursue other opportunities, or you can tell them the truth. I don't particularly care. Either way, when you apply for your next job, your next company is going to wonder why you left so suddenly, and you're going to have to answer to that for years. Every application, every interview, you'll carry this moment with you. I didn't yell. I didn't get angry. My voice stayed calm and measured the entire time, because that's the thing about real power. It doesn't need volume. It doesn't need aggression. I walked out of the restaurant, and I never saw Marcus again. What happened next is almost anticlimactic. Marcus was terminated from Tech Venture Solutions 72 hours later. I'd prepared a documentation file so thorough that the only question was whether to terminate him quietly or go through formal procedures. We went quiet. A severance package was offered. He took it. Sarah never asked me for the details. She didn't want to know. She just wanted to move forward, and we helped her do that. Financial support while she rebuilt. A therapist who specialized in relationship trauma. Time, patience, the boring, unglamorous work of healing. 2 years later, she met someone new. A good person, honest, kind, the kind of person who works a normal job and goes home and is present with the people he loves. They got married last year. I walked her down the aisle and I cried. Not because I was proud of what I'd done to Marcus, but because I was grateful that she'd gotten out, that she'd survived it. As for Marcus, I don't keep tabs on him. I don't need to. But through mutual connections, I heard that he struggled to find work for almost a year. The gap on his resume was something he couldn't adequately explain. When he finally did find work, it was at a smaller company, for less money, with less prestige. Last I heard, he was working remotely for a company that didn't ask too many questions about his background. Asterisk. And I think that's the thing about lies. They catch up with you eventually, not because of punishment, but because the person you built your life on deception around is constantly, unconsciously evaluating you. And when you're caught, when the truth comes out, nobody believes your explanations anymore, because they've already seen who you really are. You can't rebuild trust from that position. Not easily, not quickly, not without years of consistent honesty and demonstrated change. And most people just move on and try again somewhere else. They keep the same pattern, and that pattern follows them. People ask me if I regret what I did, if I wish I'd handled it differently. And the honest answer is, I don't know if regret is the right word. I'm not proud of enjoying it. And I did enjoy it. There's no point in lying about that. I enjoyed the moment when Marcus realized he'd been in a game he didn't know he was playing. I enjoyed watching him understand that underestimating someone can have real consequences. but I'm also not ashamed of it. Because what I did was strategic. It was designed to protect my daughter. It was designed to create a clean outcome. It was designed to send a message without violence, without cruelty, without destroying his life permanently. Asterisk, he's still alive. He's still working. He's still capable of building a future, albeit a more modest one. What he's not capable of anymore is lying to certain people. Because now he knows that people are paying attention. Now he understands that deception has consequences. Now he carries the knowledge that he's not as smart as he thinks he is. And maybe, just maybe, that moment will stick with him. Maybe he'll think about it before he lies to the next person. Maybe he'll choose differently. Or maybe he won't. Maybe he'll keep the same pattern forever. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. The lesson I'd leave you with is this. Patience is a form of power. The people who underestimate you are often the people who deserve to be underestimated. And if you're ever in a position where someone has hurt the people you love, you have options. You don't always have to choose the most obvious one. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being the bigger player in a game they didn't even know they were playing. And if you found this story interesting, if it resonated with you, it really helps me out if you like this video and subscribe to the channel. I tell these kinds of stories. Stories about power, about human nature, about the moments that change people. And I'd love to have you back for the next one.